And even whether we're talking about the first seal or the current seal, neither were developed with Native input or feedback. They're developed by non-Native people to tell a particular story about the Commonwealth or the colony, how it wants to perceive itself, and now how the state perceives itself. And these images, although disconnected, when I have Native friends look at the standard seal, the current one, the first question they ask me is, what's up with the Indian about to get decapitated?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation entitled False Narratives. I'm Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, the lead producer of this program, a product of a partnership between Mass Inc. and the GBH Forum Network. It's wonderful to have so many of you with us here tonight. As a Mass Inc. Senior Fellow, my goal is to elevate topics of interest to diverse communities, which I hope are of interest to the public at large. My Mass Inc. fellowship was established in the name of Greg Torres, Mass Inc.'s former CEO and former board chair who passed away last year. Greg cared deeply about public policy, and he was motivated, as one of his longtime friends recalled, to make this world a better place. And I want to thank Mashpee Wampanoag poet, author, and artist Robert Peters, who generously allowed us to use the image of his artwork in support of the promotion of this program. Along with GBH and Mass Inc., I'd also like to give a shout out to Zoe Harris, member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and advisory board member of the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition, who offered guidance during the planning process. And I want to acknowledge the several organizations that lent their names in support of this program. Mass Humanities, Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness, the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition, the City of Boston's Equity and Inclusion Cabinet, the Hassanamisco Nipmuc Band, Native American Lifelines, the Institute for New England Native American Studies at the University of Massachusetts here in Boston, and the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe. Today's talk, False Narratives, features three dynamic panelists whom I'm very pleased to introduce to you now, starting with Nichol Brewer-Lowry, a member of North Carolina's Lumbee tribe and site director for Native American Lifelines, a federally designated urban Indian health organization. Nichol does important work at Native American Lifelines, interfacing with local, state, federal agencies and leading the effort to provide health and wellness outreach and disease prevention services to urban American Indian communities. We also have with us Melissa Ferretti, four-term elected chair of the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe, representing Massachusetts Plymouth and Borndale communities. As tribal chairwoman, Melissa has championed initiatives that address challenges faced by Indigenous people, environmental justice, the protection of sacred sites and ancestral burial grounds, substance use prevention and treatment, youth empowerment, and she advocates for tribal rights and self-determination. Our third panelist is Dr. J. Cedric Woods, a member of the Lumbee tribe and director of the Institute for New England Native American Studies at the University of Massachusetts here in Boston. In addition to his work as Institute Director, where he connects Native New England to university research, innovation, and education, Cedric has been an advisor to a number of Native and Native American organizations, and he has also been an advisor to tribes in the areas of education, economic development, chronic disease prevention, and government capacity building. And I'll say that Cedric, I got to know Cedric and learned a lot from Cedric over the last 3 years that we participated in what we called community dialogues that focused on race and focused on trying to bring people from diverse communities together to better understand each other. And it's great to have people who are part of that conversation here in the audience, because that conversation in part inspired this conversation we're having tonight. Guiding us through tonight's discussion is our moderator, Tara Mays, an Associate Director of Communications at GBH and member of Massachusetts Hassanimisco Nipmuc Band. At GBH, Tara oversees the communications for the network's children's programs and educational initiatives. I also want to credit Tara for our title, False Narratives. This title attempts to capture what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Thank you, Charlotte. So appreciative of that introduction, and apologies, I'm a little bit froggy, getting over somewhat of a cold, but we will be okay together. Before we begin this conversation, I wanted to start with GBH's land acknowledgement. GBH honors the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc peoples whose ancestral lands provide the foundation for GBH's Massachusetts studios, bureaus, and transmitters. We honor the cultures, contributions, and connections of Native Indigenous peoples to our work, our local community, our Commonwealth, and our nation. Further, we recognize the importance of moving beyond acknowledgement towards action. We commit to learning from, including, and elevating Native Indigenous peoples' perspectives, voices, and languages, locally and nationally through our public media mission. Before we begin this discussion, I recently met with a fellow tribe member of mine who reminded me of a very important book I had read in grad school called Playing Indian by Philip Deloria. And in that book, there is a quote that she reminded me of, but also struck with me as we start to think about how we deal with false narratives. The quote reads, "Colonial propaganda brought symbolic Indians inside the boundaries of colonial identity, adapting figures, and I would argue, images in history, in order to convey revolutionary messages." When we think about what propaganda is, which is the spreading of ideas and allegations to further a cause or damage, I wanted to begin this discussion by thinking about how we define ourselves in this area as Indigenous peoples. And so I was going to turn it over to this group, specifically you, Melissa. If you can start by thinking about how I started this conversation through a land acknowledgement in reflection of what Philip Deloria was saying. What are your thoughts about how organizations do or approach land acknowledgements? And what do you think they intend to convey, and how do they either help or harm?
Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for this important topic. So land acknowledgements, we always say, they serve as an important first step. But in recognizing and honoring the Indigenous people of the lands as you did that we currently sit on, they remind us about the history and the ongoing impacts of colonization. But at the same time, for them to truly be effective, they really, in my opinion, they're not just symbolic. They really need to have an action item and something that accompanies them to support the Indigenous communities that you're acknowledging. So, in many ways, they're wonderful, but in other ways, there really has to be something with it that gives it sustenance. So they're great to have, but again, we would want more from it. So, yeah.
And to the others, I open this to you as well. Thoughts around land acknowledgements and how many organizations are trying to approach working together with local Indigenous communities. Cedric?
I would just reiterate what my dear friend Melissa had to say, that they are a necessary first step, or a necessary step, but by no means sufficient. If an organization or institution, whether it be a university or, Tara, to your organization's efforts at WGBH, media organization, very much geared towards teaching and helping people learn and engage. It's part of a process, is how I look at it, versus just words on paper. It is part of relationship building and being in good relation with Indigenous peoples. And it requires work, and there's not an endpoint to it. So no period at the end of that acknowledgement, rather an and. for other things that follow.
And thinking about relationship building, I know some people might feel concerned or apprehensive about approaching Indigenous communities for fear of getting it wrong and that initial first step. So one of the things that we had discussed as a group before this was how Native communities refer to themselves, whether that's as Native, Native American, Indigenous, Indian. So can someone specifically speak to some acceptable terms, or if somebody's concerned about, do I refer to somebody as as part of a tribe or a band? Melissa, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, this is a topic that's, people have different feelings about, and I can only speak to how I feel about the words that are used. And I know there's some people who agree with me and there's some that may not. And I'm sure that Dr. Woods and Nichol may have completely different versions on this. But for me, Herring Pond, we have been written in historical records for a very long time as the Herring Pond Indians. We realize we're not from India, but that is a term that's widely used to identify Indigenous people in the United States and abroad. And of course, Indigenous is the word that we generally go for today most of the time. And I try to be, respectful, and I obviously would not want to insult any of my Indigenous people or my Native friends. But the words can be interchanged, and I personally do not. I refer to us as the Herring Pond Indians, and written in federal records, we are referred to as Indians as well, American Indians. So I guess in many ways, how we are referenced is really sometimes an individual thing, I guess, and maybe even a community-wide in certain instances. So for me, myself, I do refer to myself as Herring Pond Indians. We do say that, and it doesn't necessarily offend me. But I do, again, try to be respectful and use the word Indigenous or words that would be safer, so I do not cause harm myself. So that's my thinking.
And thinking that, to your point, Melissa, that Indigenous people are not monolithic and that it depends on who you're talking to. Even when it comes to thinking about how we group ourselves based on tribes or bands in this state specifically, we have both. Cedric, maybe you could speak to the way that people describe, or the history behind how some of that terminology came to be, just to provide some context.
Well, a lot of the terminology that is currently in use, either historians or anthropologists or both get the blame for that. Very little of these terms, unless it is an example of an Indigenous community reclaiming their original name for their community and their particular political structure. And without going into detail about all the hierarchies, my simple rule is always ask in terms of how people choose to be referred in relation to their Native identity or Indigenous identity. I always think of it in terms of concentric circles, with Indigenous being this very huge category. There are Indigenous people on every continent where there are people. And we are a subset of those Indigenous peoples. We are Indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. Across the border, where we have many people residing here locally in the Commonwealth, First Nations is a term that is used and embodied in the Canadian Constitution. Melissa, to your point, just as politically and in statutes, it's American Indian here and American Indian tribes. In Canada, it's First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples. And so again, it's highly variable and it's complex and diverse, and that Tara may scare people, but making mistakes is okay and also expected. We're all humans, but asking is always the safest thing to do.
Sure. And there's an understandable reason why some people might tiptoe towards building these relationships and be concerned about making mistakes. And Nichol, I'm wondering if you can think about in relation to what I was talking about in terms of propaganda, about how there's trauma and stigma sometimes associated with certain words. And there's a history of that around that trauma and stigma.
Yeah, and I when I present to a lot of groups, I start off by saying this is a safe space and that I welcome questions that are difficult, politically incorrect. I get the casino question a lot, and that's okay. I want people to ask those questions because I've done the work to prepare myself. Not perfect or the, best person, for every conversation, but at least I think that as Native people, we have to give ourselves the time to actually think through some of these things that non-natives may be asking us, to know how to help them see us and be able to engage with our communities. And, I will say when I was younger and going to college, my first week at university, individuals said, "Oh, you must be happy to be in the dorms and not in the teepee anymore." And I was shocked. And, I had to take a step back and control my anger around those questions and be like, okay, maybe they don't know some of this information. And so no matter how ridiculous it may be, I think if you're truly asking from a place of sincerity rather than, picking or bullying, then I think that most of us are willing to take the time out to actually sit down and educate.
One of the things and one of the reasons why I wanted to read that quote is because I think with thinking about false narratives specifically in this area, it's important to get the history and the context before diving into the issues. And so I was going to switch gears slightly and draw our attention to symbols, which is also a big use in propaganda material. For many, the state seal and flags inspire pride in one's state or one's country or what have you. But for others, it could be really harmful. And so one example of that is our own Commonwealth's flag for Massachusetts. There is a movement happening, I think it's been happening for quite a while, to change the image of the state flag. And I can see that it's up for the audiences to see. Cedric, can you just talk a little bit about the right side flag and the history, and then maybe shift into the evolution to the left side and what's going on in these images?
Thank you for that question. And it's a very long, complex, complicated story, so I'm going to do my best to do it justice in a relatively short time. Images are chosen to tell a particular story. And when we look at the first image, what the alleged Indigenous person is saying is, "Come over and help us." Embedded in that phrase is the use of the spreading of Christianity as a justification for colonization and conquest. And that's really what this is about. There are other images within the larger shield, the down-pointed arrow, the bow, which in the English minds, the down-pointed arrow symbolized peace, i.e. that these Native people were going to be peaceful and in need of help and in need of assistance. And this is directly in contrast in response to these large, robust Native nations, Indigenous peoples that were thriving here before sustained contact. And it was indeed the English colonists that were in desperate need of assistance to be able to eat, to learn how to grow plants, crops, and survive in a place that very much was foreign to them, but very much Melissa's homeland and other Wampanoag peoples. And so this image evolves and changes over time. Images change, seals change. I would leap into the next conversation and say mascots can and should change as well. Just take a look at the example of the seal. And even whether we're talking about the first seal or the current seal, neither were developed with Native input or feedback. They're developed by non-Native people to tell a particular story about the Commonwealth or the colony, how it wants to perceive itself, and now how the state perceives itself. And these images, although disconnected, when I have Native friends look at the standard seal, the current one, the first question they ask me is, what's up with the Indian about to get decapitated? That stands out very clearly, even though if you look at heraldry and the explanations behind it, those are disconnected, but it very much is what Indigenous people see. And it also is reflective of some of the history of settler Indigenous relations here in the Commonwealth, of Native people being decapitated and having their heads placed on poles, particularly following periods of sustained conflict where Native people are fighting for rights to land and sovereignty, control of themselves and of their communities. So these seals are designed to tell a story, are designed to emote, to call forth certain feelings, but how Native people see or experience those is a different thing altogether. And my dear friend Melissa actually served on the State Flag and Seal Commission and can speak firsthand about that process and where we are now in terms of the potential change.
Yeah, Melissa, I would love if you could just share how the movement to get the seal kind of started, and then your experience as being on the special commission to get the seal and the flag changed.
Sure, yeah. So the special commission was established from a bill to a legislator in 2021. And we had legislators on the group, historians, tribal leaders, and others. And it was a group of about 20 of us that had gotten together, including the Commissioner on Indian Affairs. So we were tasked with really reviewing all of the history, and our job was to make recommendations as to what we were supposed to do. So we came up with obviously a recommendation that the seal and flag needed to be changed and revised, and then the commission was disbanded at the end of, I think it was November of 23. And then now there's a new commission. There was she signed an amendment to Governor Healy signed an amendment that would allow a new commission to be established. It's a much smaller commission. I guess it was approximately 10 people that the governor would appoint. And she only allowed a 12-month process for them to finish the design and come up with, I guess, the top 3 designs that will be vetted, and they will solicit, design concepts from the public, and there'll be hearings that will be held. And then after that, they will hire a professional designer to create the new seal, but they'll have to obviously choose one of the 3 first. So the amendment was actually co-sponsored by Joe Comerford and Jason Lewis and Becca Rausch, I do believe. So that's where we are now. It says it's going to be a 12-month process. So I think that's, after being on the commission and really, going through the timeline that it took us just to kind of get to a place where we all agreed that it needed to be revised. I do hope that the 12 months can be, that can happen.
So, and we got a question in the Q&A that I want to address because I think it's an important one, and Melissa, maybe you could speak to it. But given that you sat on the commission, and correct me if I got the history wrong, you spent the time on this, and then you had to disband, and now there's a new commission, and now there's an amendment to do a redesign, or not a redesign, to put a pitch out there for a redesign within the next 12 months. It feels like it's a long process. Not surprising, but it feels that way. So what are some of the ways that people, anyone, can help push this initiative along to try to see if we can get this changed?
Well, I mean, I always think that, correspondence and letters help, but I think if people are paying attention and we can really get people to attend those public meetings, I think that was one of the things that, I was really concerned with. I think having the public voice and having everyone to be able to have a chance to speak on it is important. So I think the best way to help would really be to try to be a voice and to be in attendance at those initiatives and those meetings, and submit letters if you have an opinion that's really strong, whether it be one way or another. We do know the climate is a little bit different now, so there could be more opposition now as well. And all of that feedback is really necessary, I think, to make a fair decision. So if people really want to help, I would say get involved and, pay attention to what's happening and try to follow the timeline if you can, and send letters or send your opinion so they know, so we know.
And to some extent, or does anybody on the panel feel that some of this is lack of education in the sense of maybe not everyone knows what's really on that flag, or the symbolism or the violence really that's portrayed on it. I don't know about everybody else, but I don't necessarily go around staring at flags. And so I'm wondering if part of this is just a lack of awareness. I don't know how you feel about that, Cedric.
I would, I do 100%. I'd also encourage people to take a look at the final report from the Flag and Seal Commission. There was an excellent final report detailing the process, how they went through it. And there was also a statewide survey of people's ideas, thoughts, what they did or didn't know about the current flag and seal, and what they wanted it to be. It also asked aspirational questions. And I think that very much should inform what happens next in terms of the design of a new flag and seal that represents everyone. The only word that's on the current flag and seal that people liked and the majority agreed to was peace. And that's certainly not the image you take away from seeing the current flag and seal.
And then the flag and seal being one example, I'm going to bring to this panel's attention thinking about a larger topic actually that's happening nationally around Native people and imagery and mascots in various communities, and Massachusetts is not immune to this. Cedric, I wanted to ask, what is some of the history behind these mascots and the imagery being used as Native people in order to, I guess, support these teams this way?
I really liked you using Phil's quote at the beginning of the panel about images being used to essentialize a people or to tell a story very different from who those people are. It boils us down to a caricature in many cases. And some of these are still actively used, some have changed, but all of these are from teams in Massachusetts, either historically or contemporaneously. And it's significant to look at and engage with these topics because many states have eliminated the use of Native mascots in public schools because that's what's linked to public funding. But I think it's important for us to realize too, the history of it originating essentially at the closing of the frontier, if you will, is when they become very prevalent, tied to professional teams, local teams. And I see it as an extension of the conquest of Native people and the attachment to them and where it moves forward to. But rather than just thinking about what it means historically and that it could represent conquest of Indigenous peoples and the appropriation of those images, I think it's also critical to look at the harm that it causes to Native youth in K-12 educational settings. And the research is very clear on that. And when we think of what should drive what occurs in K-12 education, it should be based on policy, based on research versus emotion. And the research is clear and unequivocal that it does help generate hostile climates for Native students, lower self-esteem, increased negative feelings, and increased belief in negative stereotypes, like Nichol lived in a teepee until she went to the dorm. All of these things are reinforced via the mascots. And that's why I think it needs to change. It should change. But that bill is not moving anywhere at this point in time. It was introduced, had some support, some hearings, but to my knowledge, it will have to be reintroduced again in the next legislative session.
And I guess same question from the SEAL, what are ways that people can try to support that initiative, or if they live in a community where Indigenous people are being used in this way, who should they reach out to?
Reach out to your elected official, both your House of Representatives and your senators, and encourage them to sign on as co-sponsors for the bill.
And I don't know if you know the Cedric, but I was thinking about this. I think in Massachusetts, when you were talking about it starts in the schools also, and it's tied to the curriculum. I think in Massachusetts, it's third grade is the year that indigenous culture is quickly touched upon. And then I believe it goes away, but I want to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn unless somebody else has more knowledge. But I think if someone could speak to the ways that they can encourage even their schools to do a little bit more digging when it comes to this history and to reaching out and to this community building that we talked about in the beginning. I don't know, Melissa, if you have ideas, or Nicole.
You want to go, Nicole?
No, so I just want to say that, I oftentimes hear that, our kids are too young to talk about these difficult issues. Well, so are our Indian kids. They're too young to have to carry this trauma and these issues on their back every day. And no one considers what they are living through. So if they are old or young enough to have the conversations, then I think non-Native kids are also old and young enough to have the conversation too. I highly recommend that you get to know local tribes, tribal members, become involved, not just a one-off situation and then think that you're an expert. It takes years to build trust with tribal members and for them to welcome you in. And I ask that when you are welcomed in, that you're continue to be respectful, and get to know their history, get to understand what life is like for them, and then start to teach your children and those kids around you the true history, the true reality of being an Indian in today's society and what those impacts mean. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about our community, and so let's start to break those, so that we don't carry those on to the next generation.
Nicole, if you don't mind, I'm going to keep the hot seat with you a little bit and thinking about what you're saying about impact and how the history absolutely impacts the present. Nicole, I know you were introduced, but you work for Lifelines, and it is a federally funded Native serving organization that focuses on health and wellness, as well as many other issues. Can you speak to some of the impacts and things that you see through your work every day and some of the issues that are happening within Indigenous communities, specifically in this area today?
The one issue that we get called for the most is housing. And I know that that's a struggle for a lot of people who are non-Native as well. But considering the history of this land being Indigenous land, it's kind of unnerving to me that we have Natives here who are homeless. And how can you be Native and be homeless in America? Those two things should never go hand in hand. And also to think about the history of Boston and how the Native folks here, built the city and the contributions that they made, and to know that they are being moved out of the city. And so many families, I look through pictures from Lifelines from years ago and I see all these youth, and I go looking for these youth, and only to find that they have moved completely out of the city into other places in Massachusetts or completely out of the state because of the cost of living. And that's really sad and unfortunate. And so I think that the next thing that we get a lot of calls about is assistance with substance use programming. We don't have a lot of options that are Native culturally based programming. And so that is something that we need help with developing. Thankfully Mashpee has some new programs, a new house, but it's not that I think they're already at capacity. And so, there are options that individuals call us and want every day, and we can't fulfill them because we don't have a place to send them. And then our third request that we get a lot now is mental health. we've had an increase in requests for mental health services. And so a lot of individuals also request Native providers, and that is hard to find. And the reason why they request Native providers is because they said the Native providers already comes to the table with an understanding, a basic understanding of what life is like being a Native person. And so, when you're with a non-Native provider, oftentimes you spend half a year to a year just trying to get them to understand what it means to be Native. And that takes away from the time that you should be working on the other issues. And so I think that to help us, we need help getting more students in school. We have some individuals who are in the educational pipeline, and can't afford to take time away to complete their clinical training because they need money in order to support their family. And we have individuals who just need to take the test and don't have the finances to take the test or the study material that it takes. So, that's another area that I wish I had more providers tomorrow, because we could fill all their slots.
And Nichol, I know you shared this with me, but just to give the attendees a sense, how many people are in your department and how many people do you serve?
There's only 3 of us here at Native American Lifelines of Boston, and this office serves all of the natives who live in the states of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And we do have clients from at least one client from each of those states. And so at any time, if anyone calls us from one of those states and they are a Native, federal or state recognized individual or descendant of a federal or state tribe, we are called to task and we are required to help them.
So given that's 3 of you for thousands of people, again, I'm going to give this question out there about what are ways that local communities can support and maybe help or reach out.
Yeah, I think, we always take donations. That helps us. Being a federally funded program, there are restrictions on some of the funds that we have. For example, an individual can come to me and, I can help them with healthcare through IHS dollars all day, but I cannot buy food for them with IHS money. And so, getting funds from other resources allows me to put food on the table sometimes for families. Sometimes it may also help us to get emergency housing if needed for families, or clothing items for families. So I think, donations are helpful. Volunteering, we always are hosting events. And so we would appreciate volunteers for our events or coming in to our office to help us prepare packets of information or bags that may be used for domestic violence victims or veterans. Putting together those packets are also helpful. I think also, being in community with us and learning from us can also be important. And institutions or other healthcare institutions that maybe are not ran by natives get to know us, because our natives are in the city and they're going to need your help too. And I like to highlight that you don't know who's a native just by looking at them. And so a lot of medical facilities in the area have stated that they don't feel like they're serving the native population. And I ask them, how do they know that? And they'll say, because we don't see them. And, so we're working on what you see with your eyes and what you see on paper can be very different. And so, we need healthcare facilities to be able to acknowledge us and not just go by how we may look, because those are the things that, the people that they need to be helping. And I always say that the reason why it's important is because of the 16 chronic diseases, we are number 1 in 15 of 16. So we need a lot of preventative care versus reactive medicine. And right now that's where we're mostly in a reactive state versus in a preventative state.
I want to follow up real quickly too on the issue of housing and challenges for Native peoples in relation to housing. It's not a one-off. To Nicole's point, it also has historical roots. Tara, Melissa, both of your tribes directly impacted by the Indian Allotment Act here in the Commonwealth. Before the General Allotment Act happened nationally, it happened here. You were ground zero for a statewide test of that policy. And its goal was very clear: to break apart native homelands and to separate native peoples from those homelands. And you can't think of that act and not draw a through line that it has a impact on native peoples' loss of land when that land is changed and moved from collective control of those lands by tribal communities to individual fee simple title, where it's subject to taxation and liens and fraud. And Tara, your community, John Milton Earl estimated that you'd had roughly $1 million stolen from the Nipmuc Fund in 1859. So what would that look like in dollars in the current today's market? And what kinds of housing and health issues couldn't address if those funds had still been present and under tribal control?
And I think I can piggyback too on that, Dr. Woods, because when we talk about the Allotment Act, it really brings me back to, the previous conversation about relationships and how we can learn about the Native people that are local. And I think for the Herring Pond tribe, we were just recently, as some of you may have read in the news, reaffirmed our sovereignty, something that we've known. We predate the federal government, and here we are, just finally getting our reaffirmation just from the state, which is amazing. Thank God for being, thank the Creator for being heard. But we talk about, the invisible Indian, and the disappearing Indian, and myself, being educated in the Plymouth public school system, my entire life and childhood growing up there, invisible in that school system. I probably attended every school in the district, and they did not teach us Indian education. It was not in the curriculum. We learned about the Thanksgiving meal and the Pilgrims, and the Mayflower was the highlight of our classroom. So, it's having that cohesiveness in the autonomous tribal community is amazing. But, I also say that it is also our responsibility as Native and Indigenous people in the region to do what we're doing tonight. And that's to get out and to educate the public about who we are. But again, as Nichol said, we need to, people need to just educate themselves and come to the table and learn about our community. So thank you.
Well, Melissa, in that vein, I believe you are the first Wampanoag woman in Massachusetts to win an election as the select woman of Bourne. And what you were saying about relationship building and how it's kind of up to people to reach out, but also up to Native people to kind of push a little bit. Can you speak to how you were able to convince Bourne and the voters of Bourne about the agenda that's really important to the Wampanoag community? And that includes what Charlotte introduced about environmental justice.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I always say, now that I've taken this role on the select board, that I really walk in two worlds. It hasn't been as challenging as I had thought it had been. So for my campaign and the election, I mean, I really went in and I just was myself. And I think when you go into these campaigns, somebody like myself with no really political background, I hadn't previously sat on any finance committees or any of the boards in the municipality, but it was a step that I knew it was necessary. And in order for us as Indigenous people to really make a difference, we have to have a seat at the table. So how did I convince people? Yeah, I think just like I said, being myself and really telling people that, I wasn't doing this. I didn't have an agenda. My agenda was to come in and do good work for my community that I live in, like I do for my tribal community. And it's actually been a really, really wonderful experience. I haven't had no struggles there, knock on wood. And I think it's important. I think more Native people, more Indigenous people, more Indians and Herring Pond Indians, Wampanoag people, Nipmuc people should really get seats at those tables. You don't have to have an Ivy League education to do good work for your town and to really be a face for your Indigenous community. So I hope that answered your
It
question.
did. And just thinking about walking in two worlds, and I'm sure you had to find a lot of common ground and show how you had similar interests and issues that you wanted to bring up with communities. Can you share some lessons that you learned?
Wow, lessons. I don't know. I think it's still been a really great experience. I haven't really had any. I don't feel like I've had any lessons. I think yeah, that's a tough question because it's been a positive experience pretty much all the way through. We've actually built stronger relationships with the town of Bourne, I think, because the community knows, they have a herring pond person that's on the board and helping work through the town issues. So, yeah, I think I'd have to wait until my tenure's over to tell you what lessons I've learned.
I think you shared a lesson. I think you shared that it's not so scary and that you can
yes,
absolutely do it.
I guess the lesson, was that we always go in and I think as Native people and people of color, I think we go in and we suffer from this sort of imposter syndrome sometimes. And you wonder if you're good enough. Am I smart enough? Can I do it? And, we go in worrying. So I guess that would be, if I was to share a lesson, thank you for that, Tara. That would really be it. It's just, be yourself. And if you go in with good intentions and a good heart and you want to do good work, it's going to be a good experience and you're going to make a difference, I guess. So.
Great. Well, I know we could go on forever with many questions, and we ran the gamut from first contact to today. And so a lot of complex topics, but I wanted to give time for questions that we got from the audience. I know we have a really engaged audience with lots of questions. So Charlotte, I was gonna turn it to you for the first question.
And I just want to say what an amazing discussion. Yes, we could go for another hour or two, no doubt. Here's one that jumped out. Kate LaPrade was asked this question. She says, in the arts and cultural sector, we are thinking quite a bit about 2026 and the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Well, she's wondering if any of the panelists would be willing to share thoughts on this commemoration and how we can ensure inclusivity, right, and Indigenous perspectives and participation.
Some organizations are already doing this. The region we're in for National Park Services has been holding some sessions and invited tribal folks in to talk about what this means, not just in relation to the 250th, but in the broader context of their community's experiences, impact, and what they're looking to get out of these conversations and involvement and participation, potentially in some of these things that happened here. So I'd say start early. We're almost a year too late to do some of those conversations, but it's better now than not at all. And I do want to underscore too that Native peoples in the Commonwealth played an important role, both in terms of the actual military conflict. There were many Native peoples from every Native community in the Commonwealth that you can think of that saw service in what became known as the American Revolution, and even a tribe who's no longer in the Commonwealth. The Stockbridge Mohican people had an entire regiment fighting as allies of those who would become known as Americans later. And it also begs the question, what was the consequence for the service and the sacrifice Native people made in terms of equity or the lack thereof following the end of that conflict?
There were also a number of questions around how to be in touch with the commission, the Special Commission on the official seal and motto of the Commonwealth. Melissa, we know that's at the Massachusetts State House at 24 Beacon Street, Boston, 02133. But is there a website or something? How do we direct people who might want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, it is on the legislative website. There is a page for it. So I think that would probably be the best place because I have not seen any new news regarding who is going to be heading or who the commissioners are going to be. So I'm really curious about that myself because it says it's going to be much less people, but I'd really love to know who's involved. So I really don't know, other than to probably, as you said, check with the governor's office there and find out and go on the legislative site. I mean, that's where I found some of the information to get my updates as well.
I think others too want to ensure that there is a public comment period where people are going to be able to weigh in, share their perspectives on this
That's
issue.
one of the things they're definitely doing. That was one of the broader goals of it, is to the public outreach.
Okay, that's terrific. Let's see. And I think one thing that also popped up here to me was to you, actually, Melissa, while we have you, is this question. This was from an anonymous attendee. Were there other Indigenous children in any of your public school classes? When you told, you're talking about your personal experience going to school in Plymouth.
Could you repeat that one again?
Well,
find it.
I guess the sense was, or I'm taking from this question, the question is just basically, were you the only Indigenous child in your class, or were there others in your classroom with you?
Oh no, my sister Brenda and I, we went to school together, and I think Nicole's comment about you can't tell by looking at somebody that they're Indigenous is so accurate, because we looked entirely different, but yet we had the same parents, right? So no, my sister, and we have several families, of course, my aunts, and she had 5 daughters that went to school with us. But many of us, from what I'm told, we were a lot of people, they couldn't check the box. There was either no box to check. And I had some of my cousins that told me that they would check off Native American for their children, and then they would change it to Asian or Black. So oftentimes their school records, they were allegedly being changed as well. So, the numbers we all know are not accurate the counts are not accurate. And I know Dr. Woods knows quite a bit about that.
And I did want to point out that in the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there are only 2 school districts that apply for funds to benefit Native children. And that is in Mashpee, and now Boston Public Schools has reestablished its Indian Ed program. In North Carolina, there are 17. And you only need 10 kids to access the money. And I would bet my paycheck there are more than 10 kids in more than 2 school districts in the Commonwealth.
I think also, just from personal experience and what Melissa was and Cedric was saying about you can't tell based on what you look, there's also might be some fear of raising your hand saying you were talking specifically about my community, because it's kind of a mic drop, everybody turns to look at you kind of moment, and it's kind of a shock and awe of like, you're still here, because the way it's often taught is very past tense. So I would say, like, aside from, assume that there is an Indigenous child within the school is always the safe bet. And thinking about the ways that your community or your school district can specifically make them feel seen without necessarily calling them out. And if there isn't, which I highly doubt, it's good for everybody to learn anyways.
And I think that's why, it takes the effort of multiple organizations. We have the Indian Education Program, but like having NACOB or Native Lifelines or MCNAA, other tribal members and organizations, like telling these kids you are enough and you are important, and this is your history, and this is why it's okay for you to stand up, and even when it's difficult. And I think that, our youth are going to be our change makers. And so we have to empower them to make that change.
I think the last thing that we might want to just end with is more of a charge or a challenge to those who took time out of their busy schedule to be here, and to really give people some steps around what they can do. Nichol, I want to return your words to you, which I thought were very eloquent, getting to know local tribes and tribal members, being respectful, getting to know the history and the true reality of being an Indian in our society. And I think if we could just, with the remaining couple of minutes left, drill down just a little bit more deeply, reiterate some of what you said, but if there's something that was missing from the discussion now, to highlight that for the audience.
Yeah, I think that some of the things that you can start to do is follow us on our social media platforms. of Native American Lifelines of Boston. I know Herring Pond has a page. The Nipmuc tribe has a page. NACOB, North American Indian Center of Boston, has a page. The Mass Center of Native American Awareness. These are just some of the organizations and tribes. I know that Mashpee, Aquinnah, all of them have pages, and you will then be able to connect to other organizations that are within the tribe. Kinship Hills is another one out in Aquinnah doing great work. And we post events, and we will state on there if it's open to the public. If it's open to the public, we invite you to come and join us. That's the only way you're going to get to know us, is when you join us. We have powwow season that'll start in May and goes till about September. And so I encourage you to bring your family out. It's a nice time. You'll get to have, food from the local area, and arts and crafts, and just being together. I think for us as natives, we're very much about family, whether it's a cohesive and kumbaya family or a dysfunctional family. We enjoy family, and so in order to enjoy that with us, you've got to be in community with us. And again, I just say, just come and be respectful. And if you don't know, it's okay to ask. I will say, if you're at powwows, please do not take pictures of individuals in regalia unless you ask for their permission, or it is made known from the MC that it's okay to take pictures or to join into the powwow circle. Please do not come into the circle to dance unless you are invited. Those are the two biggest rules, I think, at a powwow. And always bring cash and a good time. So
Cash and a good time. I'm going to throw it back to you, Tara, if you want to do your lightning round with folks, and then we'll close.
I think, Cedric, I actually wanted to ask you if you could share quick titles of some books, because since you're good at that, having experienced that in your classroom, some quick books that you think people should read.
Let's talk about that for a second. Come back to me.
All right.
I'll 2 or 3.
And Melissa, for you, one of the things I wanted to ask is, now that you've gotten state recognition, what are some things or projects you're excited to tackle next?
Well, everybody who knows me knows I'm quite the tree hugger, and I'm a real radical, passionate person about environmental justice. So I really am excited not only to work on the environmental justice issues in the state and the land access and all of those things. I'm also really eager to work on recovery support. That's another one of the things I'm passionate about, just because our tribes have suffered so much with that. But yeah, I mean, the options are really unlimited, and we're really excited about the government to government relationship, because now we can work to access some of these state programs that we otherwise we have been denied in many cases. So we're very excited. Thank you for that question.
Nichol, you shared for Lifelines, you shared housing being one of the biggest issues, but what are some tactical ways that people can think about? I'm thinking specifically around land acquisitions and other ways that people are thinking about supporting local communities. Can you speak a little bit about that and what that actually means?
yeah, so that's a challenge. Where are we going to be? I think that, there is a push for land back, and, land back can mean physical land being returned, but also, the indigenous people were the original stewards of this land. That's why crops grew on this land. That's why, the creatures in the waters were plentiful and were enough for us to survive on. So, returning the land also includes allowing us to be the stewards of the land. And I think that, for housing and how that is affected, let's consider what would it look like to have specific housing options for Native folks. There used to be Native housing in cities where Native people lived together as a group, and natives who were traveling into cities had the opportunity to spend the night or two there, or however long they needed. natives also went and took sabbaticals in cities, and there was housing that would house them. And so it would be nice to have some of those things to come back. I know that there are options to help individuals purchase homes. However, the cost of living is so great in the city of Boston that it almost exceeds some of those cutoff limits. So I think that some of those programs also need to be reconsidered, and what the cutoffs may be, but also how can we give Native folks the opportunity to be homeowners again in the city? I shouldn't just say the city though, because I know this is also an issue in Mashpee and across the state, but it's just very disheartening when I travel across the state and I'm learning more and more about what each tribe is facing, but housing is like the number one thing that everyone talks to me about.
All right, Tara, now I'm ready.
Great. Go for it.
And these are three very different books that will appeal to different people interested in different things. I'd say check out The Mashpee 9 by Paula Peters. It's about a contemporary fight for civil rights and dignity by Mashpee people. First and Lasting, Writing Indians Out of an Existence in New England by Jeannie O'Brien. And another one, Historical Archaeology and Indigenous Collaboration, Discovering Histories That Have Futures. And that is co-authored by one of your community members, Tara, Dr. Ray Gould.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Charlotte, I will turn it back to you.
And thank you, Tara Mays. Excellent moderation. Really appreciate you guiding us through this discussion with a bit of a cold there. You did a wonderful job. And I want to thank our panelists, Director Nichol Brewer-Lowry, Chairwoman Melissa Ferretti, and Dr. Cedric Woods. Really, thank you for your time, for your knowledge, for generously sharing so much information with us tonight. I want to again recognize artist, poet, author, Wampanoag artist, Mashpee Wampanoag member, Robert Peters, who is Paula's younger brother. And I want to thank our supporting organizations again for trusting that we could have this great conversation. And finally, to the audience, thank you for your time, taking the time out tonight to be here. And we hope that you will follow up. And while we could not get to every question, we hope that you will stay connected and that we can do more to interact and understand each other better. Thank you and good night, everyone.